This video is to show you how I like to paper piece. I'm going to start by paper piecing this dog right there. And I always begin by cutting out the pieces, like I've done right here, and I color them. So you can see, you know, this part's going to be red, and then the background's going to be green, and red and green, and then the dog's face will be white, and then you can see the parts where it's black, because I colored it black, and then I colored green around the background. So I like to take just regular crayons and color them so that I make sure I get the right piece, the right color. The first thing I do is I look at all my pieces, and right now I'm going to cut a black strip. So I'm looking for my widest black strip, and it's going to be either that one or that one, and they're probably close enough to the same. So I'm going to measure this one here. I'm just going to measure how wide it is with the ruler, so I've got the ruler on it. So the widest distance is probably from here over to here. So what I need to do is I need to add a 1/4 inch to this line because it needs to have seam allowance. And the furthest distance over here, I need to add a 1/4 inch for seam allowance. So looking at this, I need to have a minimum of a 2-inch strip, and I usually go another 1/4 or half. So I probably cut a 2 1/4 or 2.5 inch strip to do all of my black pieces. Now with my green pieces, this is probably the widest piece in green, so I would do the same thing to check out the green. I'm going to put the ruler right on this line here and add a 1/4. I'm going to go to my widest piece here and add a 1/4. So I would probably cut 2 1/4 inches, very, very minimum. I'd probably go at least 2.5. I like to go a 1/4 inch bigger. So that's how I decide how big to cut my strips. And I like to work from strips. So my widest white strip was that big. I've cut a strip of red to do the red pieces, a strip of green to do the green pieces, and a strip of black to do the black pieces. What I call scoring the paper. So I just have a very small little mat, and I have just a regular plastic ruler. This is not a quilting ruler, just any straight edge will do. And I use, this is an old broken dull seam ripper. I'm going to use the back side of it to score on the lines. So I just put this ruler on every line and I'll lightly score it. And then I'll go to the next line and I'll score it. And I'll score every line in the paper piece pattern that I will be sewing on. And after I'm done, you'll be able to see that the paper will fold very easily exactly on those lines that I scored, because I fold the paper when I sew it. Now when you score it, you really want to make sure you're scoring it deep enough to get a good crease, but you don't want to rip holes in it, and you don't want to score it so heavily that when you sew it with the machine, if you have to pick it off, the piece totally falls apart. I score for a couple of reasons. One is it helps me fold the paper exactly where I want to fold it. And the other reason is the paper comes out really easy when you're done. Number 1 is black. You always paper piece in order. You'll all go 1, and then I'll add 2, 3, 4, and 5. You always follow the numbers. So I need to put my black fabric on the back side of this piece, and I'm going to make sure I have seam allowance hanging over here and seam allowance hanging over here. And I can see, I can fold this where it was already folded, and I can tell that I don't need that extra piece there, so I'm just going to cut it off. Okay, I've got the black in position. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to fold it down between the number 1 and the number 2 line. And I'm going to trim that approximately a 1/4 inch away from that fold, because 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, while it's folded down, I can see, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I can see the next piece is right here. Can you see that? Does this angle help you see those lines at all? Okay, so I can see that the next piece goes right here, and it's green, and I have to add seam allowance, so I have to add extra around, all the way around it. So I'm going to pinch that together with my hand, and I'll take my green piece and I'll lay it side by side, right sides together, and I've more than covered that section. Then I'll open it up and I will start sewing at the very edge, and I'll do a couple stitches and I'll back stitch, but I don't want to back stitch beyond this line here. And I'll go to the next line and I'll go right to the line and I'll back stitch. Okay, then I'll open it up and I will press it right there. So I'm just pressing that right here. Okay, then I will bring it back over here, and I can see there's a couple things. I don't want this big piece of fabric in my way, so I'm going to fold on that line that already exists, and I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch away from it because that gives me the seam allowance that I will need. And I can open the paper up. I'm going to trim. We're going to add piece 3 next, and it's green, so I'm going to fold on that line there, getting ready to add the number 3 piece. I'm going to trim it a 1/4 inch, approximately. I'm not too fussy. I'm going to put my next green piece, and I can see the crease. I don't know if you can see it, but this is the piece, there's a crease here, there's a crease here, so I can tell that this area in here is where my green needs to go. And I need to make sure I have a 1/4 inch here and all the way around the outside of it. So it's kind of shaped like this, so I'm going to put it this way. And I'm just visually going, okay, I've got plenty of green covering this plus seam allowance, and here all the way around with seam allowance. And I'm going to open it up and I'm going to sew on that line, a couple stitches of back stitch and back stitch. Then I can open it up and press it. Okay, now I'm ready to add piece 4. Trim off this little piece here. I'm going to fold it down. I always fold it first so that I can see exactly where I'll sew, so I can add a 1/4 inch. And the next piece is green, and it's going to cover this whole rest of the paper. Make sure you're always putting the fabric right sides together. And I can see that the green fabric is going to completely cover that piece. Now this time, I'm not going to have to fold any more papers down, so I'm not going to, it's the last piece on this end, so I'm going to go clear out in the seam allowance and go all the way across. And I'll press it. And then I can see where the paper is, so I'm just going to trim off excess for now because I don't need to have all that on there. Okay, now I'm ready for the last piece, number 5. I'm going to fold it down. And I can see that it's not quite wide enough that way, so I'm just going to put it this direction instead. I'm going to make sure that the white paper, and I've got extra on this end, is completely covered underneath by the green fabric, and it is. I'm going to trim this off, and I'll open it up, and I'll sew all the way across, and I'll press it. Okay, the last step is to trim it a 1/4 inch all the way around. Now, a lot of your paper piecing patterns will have the dotted line around the outside edge. This pattern's a little bit different. This designer didn't do that, and so I left approximately 1/4 inch all the way around on the paper, and then I'll just true it off with my ruler instead. So I'm going to put my 1/4 inch line on the outside edge so that I'm adding 1/4 inch to the outside edge, and I'm going to cut it off. Then I will turn it, and I'll do the other side. I'm going to add 1/4 inch to the outside edge and cut it off. And we'll do the same thing on the ends. I'm going to add 1/4 inch to the outside edge. And then one more. I'm going to add 1/4 inch to the outside edge. And now you can see I have my doggy ear. Now some people like to leave the paper on so that when they sew it to the next stitch they can put a pin through exact points to know where to pin it exactly so it lines up with the next piece perfectly. I'm pretty experienced, and I don't like to take the paper off later, and I'm pretty experienced at knowing how to line things up. So for me, I take the paper out, and you can see how easy it comes out because I scored it and then sewed through it. So there is the dog ear completely done, ready for the next section.